Hello, everybody, and welcome. Delighted that you're here. This is an incredibly august panel, and I think it's going to be a very, very interesting, high-octane discussion, so I'm looking forward to it. I'm Meg Hildebrand. I'm the director of the Graduate Center here at the University of Arizona. And this panel is brought to you logistically by David Bradshaw, the program coordinator for the Graduate Center. So many thanks to David for organizing this. And financially made possible by Dean Andrew Carney of the Graduate College, whose vision the Graduate Center is. So many thanks to him too. And thanks especially to our panelists, whom I'll introduce in just a moment. But I wanted to let you know that one of the reasons we put together this panel is because graduate students have one of the hallmarks of the University of Arizona, one of its sort of signature strengths, I think, is the premium that it puts on interdisciplinarity. And it's not just a buzzword here. Resources are put into interdisciplinarity. You know that when resources are put into something, it really is a core value of the institution. And our faculty are involved in extraordinary interdisciplinary research and enterprises. But graduate students come here partly because they're interested in interdisciplinarity, and they ask often, how does one do it? How do you put together, say, an interdisciplinary team, and how do you manage it, and what are the logistics, the challenge? I think people have a strong sense of the rewards, and I think we'll have a stronger sense when we hear from the panelists of interdisciplinarity, but also just sort of the hydraulics of how it's done is a question that I get often from graduate students who are intensely aware that they are entering a workforce and a culture that increasingly calls for interdisciplinary teamwork and interdisciplinary solutions. And so I've asked the panelists today to speak to us about their work because of the breadth and significance of what they've done in many different disciplines and across fields. So I'll introduce all three of them at once, and then I think the way this is going to be structured, correct me if I'm wrong, is that each of you will speak for about 5 minutes about what you do and what you've learned about the challenges and rewards, the kind of generative qualities of interdisciplinarity, and then we'll just open it up for questions from the audience. So I'll start with Regents Professor Emerita Paula Fan, who comes to us from the Fred Fox School of Music and the University of Arizona Confluence Center, where she's a senior fellow. And I'm sure you know that the UA Confluence Center for Creative Inquiry builds interdisciplinary synergies across campus communities, and it promotes the development of kind of dynamic intellectual environment, especially in the areas of the arts, the humanities, and the social sciences. Professor Fan is a soloist and a chamber musician. She's performed on 5 continents and has recorded 17 albums. She serves as the Tucson Symphony Orchestra's principal keyboardist, and she coordinates musical events at the Biosphere 2. In addition, she's a founding member of the Solar Storytellers, a solar-powered piano trio. This gives me cold chills. This is so cool.
I'm going to talk about that.
Fantastic, fantastic. Which is sponsored by the Arizona Research Institute for Solar Energy, and she actively tracks animals for the Earthwatch Institute. Regents Professor John Hildebrand is the founding head of the Department of Neuroscience, and his research combines anatomical, behavioral, chemical, and neurophysiological methods in clearly a multidisciplinary approach to problems of the organization, physiology, functions, and post-embryonic development of the insect nervous system. So he is a very polysyllabic man. And he also serves as Foreign Secretary for the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and is the recipient of numerous awards. We'd be here all the rest of the afternoon if I told you all of his awards, but I'll just say a few. The Sloan Foundation Postdoctoral Research Fellowship, the Humboldt Research Award, the Wigglesworth Award from the United Kingdom's Royal Entomological Society, and the Galileo Circle Fellow Award from the University of Arizona College of Science. And our third panelist, Dr. Stuart Marsh, is professor in the School of Geography and Development in the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences. He's also director of the School of Natural Resources and Environment in the College of Agricultural and Life Sciences. Dr. Marsh is chair of the Arid Lands Resources Sciences Graduate Interdisciplinary PhD program here at the U of A. In his research, Professor Marsh uses remote sensing and geographic information technologies to assess and mitigate complex problems associated with arid lands management, climate adaptation, and sustainability. Prior to entering academia in 1988, he served as a geologist for the U.S. Geological Survey and as a geographic information research specialist in the private sector for Gulf Oil Corporation and Sun Exploration and Production Company. In addition, Professor Marsh was the National Research Council President Research Associate for the Jet Propulsion Laboratory at California Institute of Technology in Pasadena, California. So thank you very, very much to all three of you. Sorry to take so much time, but this is you're a victim of your own excellence. And I'll turn it over to you all. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Oh,
I
it was sort of tag, you're it. Not fun.
No, Paula said, who's going to go first? I said, well, beauty before age. So.
Yes, right. Yes, okay, well, I'm the wild card here. I'm a pianist. And generally, when you think of interdisciplinarity, you don't necessarily think of the arts as being part of it. But they've always existed in conjunction with other disciplines because, you know, arts and humanities have wandered hand in hand throughout the ages. But traditionally, we don't think about the arts and sciences together, in spite of the fact that there are underlying principles of organization that we have in common. If you think about, well, just even the business of high to low, long to short. Come on, there are formula there. I don't know if other musicians will say that, but I'm the daughter of scientists. That does make a little bit difference. The other thing, of course, is that he's a closet trombone player. But if you start looking at the arts, you can see that they have tremendous illustrative possibilities. If you look at the drawings of Leonardo or the paintings of Audubon, even if you look at the new trend now, if you look at talks on YouTube and you see a hand there drawing stuff very, very quickly and in quick time, illustrating things. And of course, you know, we all grew up using mnemonics for the ABCs to the tune of Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Because in the case of my own discipline, the arts touch people in different places. It can touch people in emotional places that prompt discussion and prompt a certain amount of thought. And the other thing about the arts, when combined with other things, you know, we're dealing now with all of you, most of you, grew up in what, you probably don't even know this term, the MTV generation. You know, you are used to having all your senses engaged. And so we are a part of this particular thing. And in the case of music, we are responsible for the thing known as an earworm. So in that respect, we are probably one of the most memorable forms of the arts. So what have I done to get it together? As I mentioned, I'm a scientist's daughter, and I wasn't going to be a pianist. I actually liked reading about science, and I am a pianist just because it was the path of least resistance. It was fun, I had a good time, it was hard, it wasn't quite that, it wasn't too hard. And people seemed to want to hear me play. However, this one hauled me in to a number of committees in which I started to interact with people like my parents. And I was very stimulated in doing so. And of course, we're in Arizona, and I got into this sparring match with the then head of the Arizona Research Institute for Solar Energy, Joe Simmons, and about science and music, and he was a muggle. And he said, no, you can't. And I said, there's a tune for everything, and I'll bet you I can think of something that will compliment you. And so As Dr. Brown said, I'm the founding member, one of the founding members of the Solar Storytellers. The Solar Storytellers is simply a piano trio. In a piano trio, there are not 3 pianos. It's a classical genre. There's 1 piano, 1 violin, and 1 cello. However, we are all electrified. You're all used to the idea of an electric keyboard, but I'll wager a lot of you have not seen an electric violin or an electric cello. And the kicker to it is that how do we get our power? What was constructed for us was a golf cart with a solar panel as its roof. And so therefore we could drive in and plug in and then perform. And so there you have the novelty factor, you know, this whole thing. You have to remember that we in the arts are very much into outreach because first of all, we are hams, we perform. It means a great deal to us. We like to share. That's probably a better way of putting it. But all of us are associated in one way or another with nonprofits. We don't make any money. And so therefore, this whole business of outreach has a double goal in that we want to be noticed, we want to share, and we hope someone will hand us a check. But the other thing the arts have always done is that to preserve audiences, to get the word around, we've always gone into the schools. And with the symphony, I went into tons and tons of schools, and I first came to the university to sell opera. I wrote a show called Opera Is, and I reached 1,000 children one year telling them what opera was. Now, in the case of the Solar Storytellers, our theme, of course, is solar. So we had our first show, we had 3 shows. The first one is called Dr. Solar and the Fossil Fools. And you can guess what it's about. It's about the arid little country of Zona, and it's not too bright president who is approached by Fossil Fuels Incorporated about how he should heat and cool the homes in Zona. And he has a scientific advisor that he appointed but forgot about, and her name is Dr. Solara. And she keeps telling him about all the things that are going to go wrong if he goes with Fossil Fuels Incorporated. And he has all these nightmares. And finally, Dr. Solara sings to him, "We've got to build a solar house. That's what we'll do. A bright new day for me and you. Let the sunshine in, etc." But what the kids remember is the bridge. "We don't need coal or oil or even natural gas. We'll show them to the exit and kick them in the la 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 la," etc. So that's our earworm. And so that is my venture into a field that is not my own, but in which I feel that we have made a difference because we've gone to schools. We've been at the Aspen Science Fair. We have 2 other shows, Mallory the Solar Car, and the other one is called Phoebe the Photon. So that's what I do. Next.
Stuart,
Sure. Well, I came here in 1988 after working in industry and government. And it was really a change, not just of what I was doing, but how I was doing it. And that transition was somewhat difficult, but the saving grace of having a joint appointment in 2 different colleges, 2 different departments, was that I got hooked into interdisciplinary programs here at the U of A. And I became a member, and I mentioned I chaired the Arid Labs Resource Sciences PhD program for 10 years. That one, the global change, there's a remote sensing and spatial analysis, GIDPs. And those GIDPs can be very valuable in terms of being able to connect with scientists and social scientists, physical scientists, and develop research opportunities that you may not have thought of. I was very lucky in that I had a tool, or a set of tools, not much intelligence, but a set of tools that I was sought after by other scientists. So if you look at my publication record, you look at the dissertations from my students, you look at them and say, what the hell is this guy doing? Because one year he's publishing on tracking endangered species on the basis of habitat. The next year he's writing a paper about biodiversity with insect scientists. So I was very lucky because I could do all those different things because of having a tool that provided information about remote sensing and changes on the surface of the Earth, geographic information systems. And I think that my 26 years here was a lot of fun because of that eclectic approach to research. And that each couple of years, depending upon what a graduate student was suggesting he wanted to do or she wanted to do, or another scientist coming and saying, can we use your data for this application? I had a ball because I was doing all kinds of different things and was learning about all kinds of different fields during that time. So it was a very rewarding period for me. And I think if you think about it, most of you will have tools. They may not be as broad as remote sensing, but there'll be tools that other scientists can utilize. And I think the importance of interdisciplinary research, particularly from the standpoint of securing funding in the coming years, is going to continue to grow. I think if you're a physical scientist, you need to understand and be prepared to work with social scientists. If you're a social scientist, you need to understand how to work with physical scientists. There isn't going to be anything that is as pure in terms of a research project from NSF or a lot of the agencies as the old days. And so it's going to be to your benefit to gain some experience and to gain some insight from working in interdisciplinary teams.
This is fun. And I think you've heard fun already referred to. I think that probably a lot of us who do multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary things do them because it's fun to behave that way. But that's not the whole story. And I realize that our mission is to talk about how these things get developed, how the interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary endeavors get established. So we've got to remember to talk about that. I thought about that when I was walking over here because the truth is that I left a wonderful job in the Ivy League at Columbia to come here into the remote desert because of the spirit of interdisciplinarity at this university, which doesn't prevail in lots of places. And I don't know where that originated because I've only been here since 1985, and I don't know who planted the seed that made this place so favorable, so hospitable to multidisciplinarity. We were speculating that it might date back to the horrible days or perhaps to John Schaefer's days. But there's something in the drinking water here that attracts people. And of course, once you plant the seed and people are attracted to it, then they feed on that. And that keeps the thing germinating, if I can keep that metaphor. So now it's kind of self-reinforcing. And people who choose to come here instead of going to someplace else are attracted by it, by that spirit in this university. So that's one point I wanted to make is, where does it come from? How do you do it? It's somehow the spirit of the place has to encourage it. And this place has that spirit. What does that really mean? What it means is that bottom-up initiatives created by people who have the spirit, who have the curiosity, who have the breadth to do new, interesting, interdisciplinary / multidisciplinary things should be encouraged to pursue those and to develop their passion, instead of having top-down dictatorial leadership style, which prevails in a lot of institutions. So I think one reason it's been successful here, starting with whomever originally encouraged it, is that there's been a spirit in my time of bottom-up entrepreneurial, organic growth of initiatives. And I've been part of a number of those in my time. Maybe I should back up because Megala suggested that we say a little bit about our background. So I grew up in an interdisciplinary household. My father and mother were both very broadly interested. My father used to say, when we asked him, "Daddy, what do you do?" He said, "I just do everything that's interesting." And I thought that was a great message to a kid. It was kind of true, because he had been a professional musician. He was trained as a chemist, and he did electronics, and he did scientific photography. And, you know, it goes on and on. So I grew up in a household that had a spirit of not being siloed, not being discipline bound, and that's carried through ever since. The best thing that happened after my father and mother's influence was going to college thinking I was going to be a music major, and instead getting seduced in my first semester in a course that was the first time I think any place in this country had offered a course that today we would call integrated science. This was a course that was called Life on Earth, but the first semester of this year-long course didn't mention a living thing. It started with the Big Bang, and it talked about the fixing of the physical constants of the known universe, and about the nature of atoms and elementary particles, and the nature of the chemical bond. Does that sound like biology? Well, in 1960, when I took that course, this was astonishing. I mean, I almost thought they had mislabeled the course. But then it became clear as the year unfolded that this was brilliant. That's what it's all about. Mother Nature doesn't know about chemistry and physics and biology and mathematics and music. It's all one glorious thing to Mother Nature. And this course captured that, and it captured me. That was one of a couple of reasons I didn't stay with a music major. The other being that I'm not as talented as Paula Fan. But anyway, you know, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. That's what Yogi Berra said. So I came to a fork in the road and I took it, and I was a professional musician at night for 30 years while I was a scientist by day. That was fun too. Okay, now a few other points I wanted to make. What gets people interested in multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary or breaking out of the silo or whatever model you want to describe? I think it's being captivated by problems or questions that can't be approached through one prism. You have to think about the problems broadly. And in my view, practically all the existing interesting problems that are left are like that. They fit in the cracks between the established disciplines. So then it leads me to wonder, well, why do we have those established disciplines? If Mother Nature doesn't know about them, and if the interesting problems are in the cracks, why do we even have it? Well, there's a historic explanation for that. If you look at the history of universities, starting in 700 years ago or so in Europe, what was it? It wasn't like today's universities. There was a broad scholar with students around him, it was always him, talking about things that typically ranged over many fields that we would say today blur the boundaries. I mean, science wasn't chemistry or physics, it was natural philosophy. And it meant just what that sounds like. It was whatever they wanted to talk about. We got into this business of having modules or silos and discipline because of practical considerations. You know, the universities grew, student needs grew. The institution had to figure out how to organize the paychecks of faculty, so they put them in departments. I mean, it's for all the wrong reasons that we ended up with all these narrow, guild-like disciplines. Now, that isn't to say that there isn't power in disciplines. And I mean, many people thrive on the fact that by having a strong identity with the discipline and kind of the guild membership means that, you know, that they clearly have an identifiable expertise. And that's not to be laughed at. Even for those of us who are flamboyantly multidisciplinary, you need to have that. So there's something you're really good at the same time that you're interested in everything. But I think it would be great if we kept trying to find ways to blur the boundaries. And when I tell people about the U of A, I'm back in New York talking to people who've never been west of the Hudson River, and they want to know, what's it like out there? And so I tell them about the U of A as a place where, much to my delight, I often can't remember what department a colleague of mine is in, because it doesn't matter. I have colleagues who have like 6 joint appointments, and you don't remember which one is their primary. That's what I mean about having it in the drinking water. Now, when I was at in the Ivy League, it wasn't like that. I mean, you never met anybody in another building. You never met anybody in another discipline, unless they went to the same bar you went to. Here, we mix and match and kind of live a kaleidoscopic life, not ever being too sure where somebody really lives or resides. I couldn't remember what unit Stuart is in, even though, you know, we crossed paths on the path through multidisciplinary programs. So why do we start interdisciplinary units like the thing I came here to establish in neuroscience? It's partly because the interesting questions are in the cracks. In the case of neuroscience, you can't approach the big questions about what brains do and how they do it without using every possible approach. So starting in the mid-60s, it dawned on people that it would be smart to bring together anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and pharmacology and blah, blah, blah into one mix so that people would talk to each other, not dwelling just on their disciplines, but talking about the problems and the way they approach the problem. That started in the mid-60s. That's the first time there was anything in the world called neurobiology or neuroscience. Before that, people were in silos, like anatomy and physiology and biochemistry. Fortunately, I got exposed to that at the beginning, and that's why I wanted to come here and create something like that here. How do you do it? You have to think of it as a coalition of the willing. It's like a lot of other things. We're in the midst of a revolution right now in this university of how STEM, that is science, technology, engineering, math, how those subjects are taught. We're moving away from having big lectures into active learning with small groups of students. It's a huge sea change, and it's so far very successful. But how do you get faculty to do something completely different from what they've done all the rest of their lives, their careers? You go for the coalition of the willing. There are people willing to try the new thing. And you say, it's okay if you want to keep lecturing to 1,000 students at Centennial Hall. You do that very well. But there are other people who say, I want to try something different. And we now know from evidence that the best way to teach these things is through this new approach. Students learn much better this way than they do sitting in the back of the Centennial Hall, you know, looking at their mobile phones. So the coalition of the willing, the people who can't avoid scratching the itch of exploring a big problem that can't be looked at in one way, where they need colleagues who do other things and they need to learn about them themselves. Stuart and I were saying at the beginning, before we started our conversation here, that there's a person whose spirit should be in the room, and that's someone probably most of you never heard of, Herbert Carter. Herbert Carter was an extraordinary scientist who had his career at the University of Illinois, and when he reached retirement, he came to Tucson because he liked to play golf here, and he got seduced by John Schaefer, who was then the president, to come back to work. So he had retired from being provost at the University of Illinois. He had had 120 graduate students, PhD students in his career, something like that. He had an amazing career. But he was seduced back into the service here, and he's the person who created the interdisciplinary graduate programs at this university. He was a passionate interdisciplinarian in what we now call the GIDPs. That was Herb Carter who started that, and he kept working until he was almost 90 years old. Stuart used to be in the same building with him. He was amazing. And so I thank Herb. I mean, he had a big role in recruiting me, and I think in a lot of other people who wanted to kind of drink the nectar that he was the purveyor of interdisciplinarity in a place that was encouraging that. I hope we can keep doing that, even though we have lots of barriers nowadays. So I've probably said enough. I'll just end by saying that something we may all know, and that is a lot of employers today, outside of academia at least, want people who are nimble and flexible and broad and not narrowly specialized. And after all PhDs produced in the country now, only, so Meg Loder probably knows, I think it's 20 or 25% end up with faculty positions. But most do other things. I mean, they do interesting careers, but that's not the main thing we're doing anymore. And so you have to think about the whole range of career opportunities. And most of them don't want somebody who's a really narrow specialist. They want somebody who's curious, broad, nimble, flexible, and able to work in teams. Well, think about what a typical PhD student does. They work all by themselves in the back stacks of the library or in a lab or something, and they're supposed to be brilliant about one molecule or whatever. That's not the way it should be. So I credit this university for doing lots of interesting and innovative things to break out of that mold, especially with the GIDPs. I think it's a treasure in this university. Well, that's a kind of random set of observations, but I hope it stimulates some discussion here.
Thank you very much. And now a conversation. Any questions or observations?
We stand ready to converse.
Not necessarily convert. You're here because you're interested.
My name is Brad Castillo. I'm going to put this question to the entire panel. What I'm hearing is very strongly a top-down approach. I hear a lot of top-down kind of words. And each of you is a kind of top person. I'm not hearing the bottom up. I mean, I hear the words, but I'm not really experiencing that.
In what respect?
I'm going to give you, I'm going to get to a question. Okay. So, my career, I've worked at this university a long time. I've been a student a long time. I've been involved in many disciplines and interdisciplinary programs. And there's a sense of what you have to do to make it work, the bottom up. You know, if it doesn't rest on anything, it doesn't rest on anything. So, at this university, we have a lot of very skilled staff. I'm just going to pick on this one aspect. I'm going to skip over students because the staff are not noticed. And yet, each of you depends upon very skilled staff who do the work to make it possible for you to be a top person. And yet those staff are not getting recognized. Those staff are not getting involved. And the opportunities for those staff to do the things that you're talking about aren't really there. Now, as a former staff person, I've experienced this directly. This, coalition of the willing. Well, I got out there and got my peers, staff people together to teach ourselves a new programming language, right? No, we didn't just take a class at computer science because maybe that was going down the tubes at the time. We remember the difficulties. So we just did it ourselves. But we were actively discouraged just to get together. Actively discouraged. Not to mention not being acknowledged or supported. Actively discouraged. Okay? So I'm going to put this question to you as interdisciplinary people. What are you doing to reach out and directly involve the staff at the university to make sure that they expand their skills, that you retain them at this university, to involve them in this interdisciplinary work in a bottom-up way? So that's my question. What are you doing about this?
Well, I won't ask you what part of the university you're in, but it doesn't describe the part I'm in. That's interesting. It's good that you reminded us that this is certainly not a homogeneous institution.
Well, I'm currently retired. Okay. I did enough. I did a lot of work.
Lucky
But I was in the wealthiest, except for medicine, the wealthiest department in this university.
Well, I'm not in medicine. I'm in science.
Except for medicine, I'm saying it was the wealthiest department in this university. So you know what that is, right?
I don't.
You don't. No,
Is
you
it
don't.
optical science?
Space sciences.
Oh, well, okay, yeah.
Okay. Huge amounts of money, very skillful staff. You don't do that kind of work without extremely skillful staff people. So that's what I worked in.
Well, it's what you said is very interesting, and I think it's a really well taken point. Certainly, in where I live, we cherish our staff. I mean, we couldn't function without excellent staff, and we've done all kinds of things, sending them to training programs, paying for it, sending them to meetings, having them present their own work at meetings. So that's the culture where I live. These are people that are as valuable or more so than anybody. My philosophy when I was a department head, which I did way too long, was to say that it's a chain of links where everyone is equally important. I wasn't any more important than the person who washed the glassware. Because if the glassware was dirty, everybody's experiments failed. So I have a deep philosophy of a horizontal kind of structure, which I think works really well in an interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary world. So you don't have somebody who's more valuable or more respected than somebody else. But that isn't mandated or something, it has to grow organically in a particular place. And I think the only top-down element of that was establishing that culture, which I do claim that I did. But I have to say that I think just about all the interesting things here, including LPL, grew here because of bottom-up initiatives. They weren't mandated from above. Think of the tree ring lab. That was an astronomer who realized that you can learn a lot about the history of the world by looking at tree rings. No president dreamed that up or something, and now we've got the world's leading dendrochronology operation. Same with my thing. I wasn't recruited here to build a neurobiology department. I was brought here under false pretenses as an advisor. And then they told me at the exit comments, the president at the time said, well, if you were going to build a neurobiology group here, how would you do it? Write me a proposal. It still wasn't asking me to come and do it. But they liked the proposal, so then they started trying to recruit me. Now that's bottom up. They didn't tell me what to do. And it has been very successful because they let me do the thing that I knew would work. I wish I could say that we're still doing that as well as we did it in the past. I'm not so confident. I think the financial problems of the university make it really hard to do that now. That's at least one contributing factor. And I think the place is more top-down than it used to be. I'll say that. But all the interesting things I can think of, most of the interesting things I can think of here, arose bottom up. Because somebody either was given the opportunity or grabbed the opportunity. Look at Herb Carter. He came here to play golf, and he ended up building the GIDPs, which is unique in the country, right? So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm sure that, we can find any story we want here, but there are wonderful examples here where bottom-up initiatives sparked by one or two people have flourished because the institution nourished those ideas. That's what I see. And I couldn't agree more about the importance of staff. And I mean all the staff, not just the research staff. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I would agree. This is sort of an unknown scenario because I was staff. I was lower than staff when I came here. I wasn't recruited here to be interdisciplinary or to play concerts or anything like this. I was 22 years old and I didn't have anything. And so they said, well, maybe you can do something. And so I was paid with soft money for many, many years. And I was lower than an adjunct. I didn't even have a title. So the thing is, I must say within the arts, you know, a good idea is a good idea. There's no question about it. And creativity is cherished, in a sea of people that do the same thing. The question is always, how are you different? And that is one of the things that powers the arts. And in that respect, it doesn't matter who you are. If you are lowest of the low who has this weird idea, you're all right. Someone will recognize it. And so that's my particular story. Once again, I did not start at the top. That was a long time ago. I worked here for 40 years. But I did start lower than the lowest.
I'm Janice Chris from nursing, and we do some interesting collaboration, nursing with engineering or nursing with business. But the GDIPs, I remember we had them when I came here in 2000. I wasn't aware that we have those now. And I don't know that everybody knows what that stands for.
Graduate Interdisciplinary Program, GIDP.
Okay.
I think there are 14 of them, is that right? Yeah.
And some at Health Sciences also?
Well, they all span the university. I think almost all of them span the university. That's what's so cool about it.
Yeah.
They don't know about departments in colleges. They know about problems in people. I think that's the way, if we could, ideally, I'd like to see the whole university organized that way.
And I think, my home unit now, the Confluence Center, plays a role in encouraging these ideas financially. And everyone's looking for a little help that way. And it too was sort of improvised. We were, you can say we were told by the then provost to get together as a group of arts, humanities, and social and behavioral sciences. But we were just told, do something big. And this certainly was from the bottom up. There was a meeting of all sorts of people, about 100, and a lot of ideas were thrown around. And so we have this shelf. The thing I like about it is that there are programs for students as well as faculty, and a good idea is a good idea. That's it. And I must say also that as you look at institutions like, centers like ours, they're mostly arts and humanities, or they're called humanities centers. We are unique in that we're trying to be very inclusive. And while we talk about those people in the sciences, the social and behavioral sciences, you know, we are also partnering with people outside our formal purview.
And the cancer biology GIDP is one of the most prominent and important ones, and they're on your side of Speedway.
Thanks.
Physiological sciences is another one that's a brilliantly successful program. And that one's interesting because the Department of Physiology gave up its graduate program in order to support the interdisciplinary university-wide program. Not many departments are willing to give something up, but they did it for the good. And I think it's remarkable. Stuart, where did the arid lands come from? Did somebody found that as a spark?
It goes back to a U.S. Air Force grant that was, at the time, was the largest grant the University of Arizona had ever received. It was for $500,000, and it was to put together a study of arid lands as the military decided they had to go, and this is back in the mid-50s. And that eventually became the Arid Lands Graduate Interdisciplinary Program. They formed a committee, and then the committee recognized the need for an academic committee.
But it's another example where it wasn't the president. Yeah. I think the interesting things usually happen that way. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Dave from the sociology program. It seems to me that you've all mentioned that interdisciplinary, engaging with interdisciplinary research is a wonderful source of ideas. It's very engaging. It is very stimulating. But I'm also curious, what are the challenges of doing an interdisciplinary research project or working with people outside of your home?
Let me give you one concrete example from the science side. Maybe we'll hear about others. But all my career, I've been doing work that isn't the business of any one funding organization or funding stream. So I've had to go through hoops to try to get support for my work. And a great example of that was one grant proposal that I submitted once. It went to NSF, National Science Foundation, and they put it in 3 different programs because it didn't belong clearly in one. And all 3 programs reviewed it, and all 3 program directors decided, well, this is good stuff, but it doesn't really represent what we do. So the grant proposal sat in limbo for 6 months after the reviews. And the only reason I got the grant is because the division director that those programs fell in, he brought those 3 program directors in his office. He said, should this work get done? And they said, well, yeah. He said, then make it happen. So that's an example where somebody could be really catalytic, but where it wasn't a natural thing because I didn't fit clearly in one silo. So the silos exist not only in the universities, they exist in the funding agencies, and interestingly, in all the honorific organizations, you know, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, the National Academy of Sciences, you name it, the Royal Society, they all are siloed. If you're not in the middle of a discipline, you're disadvantaged. And that's just a freak of nature. I mean, it's because they had to organize the paychecks of people 500 years ago. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. Chemistry doesn't exist in isolation from physics. Biology doesn't, sociology is a wonderfully integrated field in itself, but it doesn't exist in isolation from psychology and geography and a whole lot of other things, right? So why do we do this? And then we perpetuate it across everything, all the way to honorific things. The Nobel Prizes. I mean, look how discipline bound they are. So the problem we face that you were asking about is that we're all swimming upstream, even though it's the right thing to do intellectually. That everything is organized against you, except when we have nice GIDPs. And even there's a challenge because, with all due respect to this institution, I mean, it has never supported the JIDPs commensurate with the amount of bragging it does about them. You won't disagree with that. Yeah, so that's interesting too.
I remember at lunch when I first got here with two other faculty members, and one of the faculty members said, called us to lunch because he thought we could work on projects together, combining expertise. And I remember the other person sitting at the table said, oh, you know, I don't see any really need or desire to do that. And that kind of shocked me at first, because I had never encountered anyone saying, you know, that they didn't want to collaborate. But it made me realize that there are people out there that are open to suggestions, and there are people out there that aren't. And it's important to network with knowledgeable people who can point you to the potential collaborators. And there are enough old people around like us to help you.
I think there are also cultural issues too, the more afield you get. Within again, I'm the wild card, you know, no one really thinks of, you know, we're in our own little cocoon practicing. We do a lot of that. But we are useful in the illustrative way, in the outreach way, in one way, in ways of sort of, in other ways at looking at the same problem. But I must say, and I was talking to another musician about this who was trained as a musician, he went into another field. There is a certain cultural divide between the haves as we see it and the have-nots. And we musicians think of you scientists as being the haves. And the other thing is that, and even sitting here, hearing these people use words that I don't know, you think, well, I'm stupid, I'm a carpenter, and they're smart. But the thing is that the thing that we have in common is imagination. And I think if that is understood, and if both sides make the effort to see things in other ways, it's beneficial to all. And you can come up with some pretty, see, in my particular case, they're sort of odd and crazy, which is very hard to classify, by the way. And even the stuff I do with Confluence is a little bit strange. It's classical music and a problem. Classical music and divorce specialist, get that? Classical music and a hospice worker. But the thing is that these complementary things that can be, elements that can be found, I think make all of us richer as curious and curious people and people who are fired by imagination. I mean, that's what we're trying to do here at the university, to get you to be creative, to imagine, to be different.
If I had to pass one rule in my department, people would laugh at me, but that would be to make the faculty have their doors open when they're in their office. And I think it would get students in there more, and it would get other faculty members in there more. And I think that you never know what kind of, ideas and conversation can bring out. And so I think
Yeah, and you know, that's the other thing in our model, and this gets us in deep trouble in a university. I can only teach one person at a time, but that makes a completely different relationship from the very beginning. When I get a freshman, when I got a freshman, this was a relationship unlike anything else. It's a happy streak. Well, that's a good thing.
Chain game's really interdisciplinary.
My first reaction to that was, what did we just win?
Yeah.
Everything.
I
We
thought
won
we
everything.
lost.
But you know, if all of you took one-on-one lessons with a I'm a musician, so I was like, take lessons and see what happens. I think you'll think a little bit differently.
I'm curious if you have other ideas about how to encourage this kind of creativity or the good ideas that you're talking about. The open door, I think, is a good idea. One-on-one interaction. Because even though a good idea is a good idea, sometimes for different people in different positions, whether you're a new student or you're a staff member or you're a new faculty, whatever, you may feel like there aren't resources to come up with these ideas, or maybe you just don't know how to do that, or whether you're allowed to do it. And I'm wondering if you have other ideas about how to encourage that.
So I have a thought about that, and I'm glad you said what you did, because I was trying to remember the thought that just already escaped from me. You know, when thoughts fly by, you want to grab them, because, you know, this university is great, but it lacks something very important, and we're about to get it, and that's a university club. Now, you may wonder why that matters for this discussion, but I worked in 2 universities before I came here that had a club, a faculty club, but it welcomed staff and researchers and stuff. And that was important because you got to know people from every corner of the university, not just the people that happen to be on the same corridor with you. And that's important because, in my case, that's how I learned what a Shakespeare scholar does every day. Or that's what I learned what philosophers did. I didn't know. I look at this room. I've been here 30 years and there isn't anyone in this room except Beglona that I know. Well, now, there's something wrong with that. If we had a club where we all could go anytime we wanted and just meet people randomly, it would be great, because we discovered that one of you is probably somebody that would be a great potential collaborator. And I don't know that. So we're about to get a university club. I hope you are learning that. It will, when it's built, when it's established, it's going to welcome everybody except undergraduates, which frankly I think is appropriate. I mean, we spend a lot of our lives with undergraduates, and we need no, but we need to have a place
But
where
they shouldn't be seeing us drinking that much.
Now you see, he read my mind. I was going to say we want a place where we can have adult discourse.
Over adult beverages.
But this is going to be really great, because it's going to mean that there's a chance for random encounters that never happen now in this university. And I can tell you almost quantitatively that the only reason I know anyone in this university outside my department is because I serve on a lot of committees. Now, it's crazy that I wouldn't know Beglona if I hadn't been in the Senate. I wouldn't know Paula if we hadn't played together in various committees. I met Stuart through the GIDP as a committee. Now, that's not the best way to operate. The best way is by random encounters and interesting conversations, discovering that you're doing something that I need, and boy, would it be fun if we got together. That's probably the best way to fuel collaboration, and we haven't had it happen here, but it's going to come. This thing is going to be on top of a new hotel being built right next to the Marriott. And it's going to be called the University Club, and it's going to welcome graduate students, faculty, staff, adjuncts, alumni, anybody older than an undergraduate. And it's going to have nice things. It's going to have Paula playing the piano pretty well. We're seeing to that. Yeah.
With a beaker right there. It says, write your request on the back of a $50 bill. See, that's, you know, I'm in the arts, I'm a nonprofit, come on.
No, but really, this is no joke. I mean, this is going to be wonderful, and I hope you all will pay attention when this finally gets done. It's supposed to be built within the next months, so it's going to be great.
The other thing I think is, from the standpoint of graduate students, feeling isolated in their professor's lab and not feeling a sense of obligation to work with and interact with graduate students in the lab downstairs. And I think it's critically important for schools and departments to do everything they can to foster those kinds of interactions. And that's one of the things that I've been working on the hardest with the graduate students in my school, is to get them working together and interacting together. And we're going to have a joint event, barbecue, and you know, the money I invest in having that barbecue and trying to get all the grads and undergrads
an introvert. Most people don't believe that I was and am one, but I was told when I decided to go into this business by my major professor, who in those days you always obeyed, I even have a scar to show it, said, you must, Miss Fan, you will go backstage and you will talk to people. Miss Fan, you will compliment people. Miss Fan, you will not stay in a corner. It's even if you aren't an extrovert, Miss Fan, you must learn how to behave like one. You learn something. And it was probably, it was some of the best advice I ever got.
I guess one of the things I should have said is the virtue of any mechanism that brings people together randomly is that you can't anticipate the benefits of chance and serendipity. And we don't have much of that here, but it's fantastic when it can really play fully, because you just don't know what you're missing if you don't have a chance to make new connections.
Hello, my name is Gregory. I'm in the PhD program in American Indian Studies. And my concern is I'm dealing with at least 4 different departments. Being in American Indian Studies, I have that background. But I was invited to look into some issues in higher education. So I'm also, I've got a background in higher ed, got my master's in higher ed. But it also links over to disability resource services over here. And so I'm trying to balance not just 3 with American Indian Studies, higher ed, and disability resources, but being a veteran as well, working with student veterans office. So I'm kind of like trying to figure out how to put all my research together without one being looked over. And I was just wondering, in your research with interdisciplinary studies, is it often normal to just allow for one particular field to lead the way and others just to follow? Or is it important to maintain an equilibrium or a balance between the disciplines when you're putting together literature? Or should I just be writing in a manner that's just going to get me funding? So I think that's one of the things that I have trouble with, because right now there's a big literature gap in terms of American Indians. I mean, across the country, we only make up 1% of the U.S. population. On a university, it's the same. We're only 1% of the entire student body. And then now, within that context of higher education, Native Americans, it's even smaller when I'm dealing with Native American veterans post 9/11 in higher education here at the university. So sometimes I just feel like with the small group and a really small percentage I'm working with here, how do I really put the words together to really get the attention of the different departments to really take this topic seriously? Because for me, I was actually invited to fill this gap, and they said, you got this background, we think you're the best candidate to pursue this information and produce this empirical research. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts and help me out here.
Do you have a mentor?
Yeah, I do. I have 3 of them, and here's the funny thing.
Yeah.
They're kind of like, we really don't know, but go check over there, ask them questions, and then it's like, we're not really sure, but go that way, and then ask some more questions. And so I'm kind of like, I just feel like I'm being asked to, there's some hesitancy or apprehension or reluctancy, and because it's almost like they really don't know what to do or say.
They probably don't know what to do because, well, if you were targeted as being the best person to do the work,
Yeah.
obviously they haven't done it.
Yeah.
I'd be sort of curious as to which one of your mentors targeted you. You know what I mean? Because, or whether it was one of your mentors or not.
No, it wasn't.
Because
I was,
obviously you attracted the attention of someone. You know.
because last about a year ago we had congressional leaders, and we had some top brass that showed up, and I gave a 30-minute brief narrative of American Indians serving in the U.S. military. And when I provided that information, and then we switched the conversation over to a Navajo code talker, and from there, all of a sudden, people approached me and said, this is what we're missing. We've gone across the country to different conferences, but we have all these statistics on different ethnicities, but we don't have anything on American Indians, and so we need somebody who can help us out here. So that's where I was approached, and then I went back to my committee and I said, well, I was approached, what do you guys think? And they said, oh, that sounds great, go for it. And I'm, okay, and now, but this is where I'm at now. Looking at all the current literature, yeah, there is that gap. We're not even a footnote. But there's a lot of information out there, but not specifically on American Indians or Native Americans in that context. So I'm kind
Well,
of
I think if you see the methods that are being used in those studies and apply them to what you want to do, it may be that you're leading the way
Yeah.
in this, and you have an advisor or mentors that are giving you free will to
oh wow.
experience.
Yeah, in a way, that is an incredible,
You're feeling
because
trapped.
they trust you. And sometimes we think our mentors are going to give us all the answers, but it's not so. Sometimes it's a matter of just enough support to point you in the right direction, and that they trust you.
Okay, so right now, I'm working on my IRB application, and I hope to interview. I've actually asked some Native veterans that are willing to participate and provide feedback. So that's where I'm at right now. But I'm looking for funding.
Well, the people who tap you, you've kept track of who they are.
Yes.
Okay.
I meet with them at least every other week.
Okay.
Giving them an update where I'm at.
Do they have any ideas?
Well, they did point me to some places, but they just said, well, look at this, and I just have to do the footwork and go through all these applications.
Have you talked to Maria Teresa Velez in the graduate college?
Oh boy, she's kind of in and out of the office.
She'll be in for you. She will absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna have to
I'll just
email
let her
her.
know. She'll be there for you.
Okay, she's been helpful.
Good. Well,
And
speaking
she
of.
has money.
Yes.
They said,
Yeah.
So, your story reminds me of one comment that might be worth mentioning, and that is, you're going to become the expert in this area that nobody else has really pulled together. And remember that the day you defend your thesis, because as my PhD advisor said to me as I was walking into my defense, he said, just remember two things. You know more about it than any of the people on the committee, and it's their last chance to humble you. That was brilliant advice.
So I'm in a good place then.
You're in a great place.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
Well, let's say you're in a place that you could make really great.
Okay.
It's you who'll do it, which is much more satisfying than just doing what somebody else has done or tells you to do.
All right. Thank you.
Indeed. Thank you very, very much to the panelists and all